Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I might get a little bit of pushback for, but every time you see someone talk about movies versus books, people say the phrase, the books are always better than the movies. And I'm here to tell you, that's not true. There are plenty of movies that are superior to their books. So here are 5 movies that I think are better than the books they're based off of. Now, I'm going to rank this in levels of proportion. So when I go to my number 5, which is Clive Barker's Hellraiser, what I am saying is that I prefer the film, but it's not like both of the novella and the film are both classics. They're both really, really good. They're great pieces of entertainment. So the divide between the two is a bit less than some of the things that are going to be higher on this list. But I think this is probably due to what I started with, right? Because I grew up. That is weird, but I'm pretty sure I did see this in my teens, and that's probably why I'm so weird and wacky now. But I hadn't read the book until I was in college, so I believe that the ways that I prefer might just be because I watched the movie first. But I think that there are visual, spectacular elements in this film. Doug Bradley, his performance as Pinhead is so good. It's just mind-blowing. I love the other Cenobites that are kind of not very prevalent in the novella. Like, you got the Chatterer. And you've got my boy who does this. He's like, whoa, Butterball. And I think that there's a lot of those little elements. I think of those visual elements that really kind of heighten it and bring it to the next level. And what's funny is, this is directed by Clive Barker, right? So Clive Barker still had a big say in this. So it's weird to even compare the two in a ways of which one is better, because they're both by the same artists. Just he's working in a different medium. So I love both Hellraisers. I'm just gonna say a little bit more on this one. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Can you get off? You don't need to go up there. So both are classics. I just kind of prefer this. And one of the things the other little thing that I do prefer about Hellraiser, the film, is I like that Kirsty is the daughter versus being an outside love interest. I just think that makes the relationship with Julia a little bit more interesting, and especially with Frank after he kind of possesses her father. There's extra elements to creating that as the relationship versus what is in the novella, where it is a woman who has a crush on, I believe it's Roy. So I just prefer the ways that this story is told and the visual elements and the amazing special effects. So both are classics. So that's why this is number 5. If we're ranking as far as quality goes, it would be a little bit different. But next up is actually a Stephen King joint. So Cycle of the Werewolf versus Silver Bullet. Now, again, this is one of those ones that the differences are not as skewed as what we'll see later on in this list, because Cycle of the Werewolf has some amazing artwork by Bernie Wrightson, and it was a thing that was originally conceived as being a calendar, and Stephen King, in his typical Kingy ways, could not contain himself to writing a calendar length story and just kept writing and writing and writing. Because of that, you can kind of see where the origins of this project is, because especially in the first few months, the early months of this very much have a short story, unconnected, but happening in one town. There's not as much of a through line as far as doing investigations and trying to figure out who it is, and there's not a set of characters that you're following until the very end. That's when you really kind of it's about halfway, around October-ish, is when we finally start getting into the main plot that would become what the film itself was. And I love Silver Bullet. I think it's a very fun 80s movie. I mean, you got like a freaking werewolf with a bat in one scene. Like, that is so much fun. You've got Gary Busey as the uncle. You know, you got Corey Haim as the kid in the wheelchair. It's like, you know, you don't get too many disabled characters leading horror films, especially not back in the day. And there's no magicy magics. He's disabled throughout the entire movie, and he still gets around and still kicks ass. And I love that about the story. And it's one of those things where I would recommend you read Cycle of the Werewolf. It's quite good. It's quite fun. I just prefer the overall more through line with the A to B to C to D, as like following one character on their journey and taking some of the more, you know, casual elements and slice of life bits that you get from the more separated stories, using that to have as like opening kills versus being something that you spend a lot of time with. Because like if you kind of split up the book, it is kind of split up in a way that doesn't completely work as a whole, whereas the movie does. And I just think it's a really fun movie with a lot of great action. So yeah, I love Silver Bullet, a great movie. So we might as well stick with Stephen King and go with the other Stephen King movie that I think is better than the book. Honestly, there's not many. I really do like Stephen King as an artist, and the vast majority of his work I prefer in the written form. The other one that I think and this is interesting because this is also, like Cycle of the Werewolf, this is one of the more unconventional King books in terms of how it's written. And that is his very first book that he got released, which is Carrie. Now, this is clearly the movie tie-in version of Carrie for the movie, the 1976 Brian De Palma movie. And that movie is... I love that movie so much. I love the original Carrie movie so much that I kind of love all versions of Carrie, no matter what it is. I love the Rage Carrie 2. That movie rocks. If you have not seen the Rage Carrie 2, watch it. It's great. I love both of the remakes. I think they're both interesting. The one that's like a TV movie that was originally going to be a TV series that doesn't completely work altogether, but is at least interesting. And then there is that further remake, which I do think is quite good as well. It's not as good. Again, I think that when I'm talking about movies that are better than the book, I'm specifically talking about the De Palma version. I do think that Brian De Palma film from 1976 is so good. It is a landmark in horror cinema, and there are so many great moments in that movie that you really kind of feel for Carrie. You really get into her head. You really get into the space. And because this is kind of told, the book is told in a epistolary format where there is a lot of, you know, picking up journals and picking up like articles and all of that in the book. I think that kind of makes it so that you don't get as focused of a story about Carrie, because in the De Palma version, you're almost always following Carrie. And I think Sissy Spacek has a wonderful performance in that movie. That the prom scene is like unbeatable. They're all gonna laugh at you. They're all gonna laugh at you. And I love that. I love the film. I don't know if you're coming into it in the modern era. If you didn't grow up on it, again, another movie I definitely grew up on and would probably affect where I think it's a little bit better than the book. I do still like the book. I think Carrie is a great book and is an interesting book. It's very unusual, especially if you read other King books. Like, you can see a little bit of King in here, but where King would go and where he would really kind of cement himself is really with Salem's Lot the following year, where there you really get that trademark Stephen King style that would pretty much be up to today, the kind of writing that he's doing. So Carrie is a great book. I just like the movie a little bit more because of all of the amazing special effects, those split diopter shots, you know, all of that stuff. I do think is better in the movie, but both are good. And I just love this movie tie-in version because, like, look, it's got all those. It's got my favorite thing about movie tie-in versions where you get like pictures and stuff. So good, so good, so good. Next up, this one is probably going to be sacrilege to some people, but it's my list. And that is the 1925 Lost World movie versus Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book. Now, I want to point out the fact that both this movie and the original novel, they both have some significant issues. There's a big old colonialism aspect to both of them. There are some real bad racism stuff to both of them. I do think that the racism is a little bit actually toned down in the movie. There is a horrible blackface character, but that character is just as bad in the book. And it's kind of at the point where you probably don't need to, you don't really need to read The Lost World. You can skip it. It's not that good. And you don't really need to see this movie. But I love this movie for a very specific reason, and that is the special effects. So you have Willis O'Brien and Marcel Delgado made a really, really awesome movie in terms of sheer special effects, with great stop motion, with awesome looking dinosaurs. And I think it all kind of just works as a whole. It kind of undercuts some of the really shitty things about the book. Like the fact that, like, in the book, the main guy is, like, such a dork and nerd. He's like, oh, I love you. And the woman's like, oh, I just want to be friends. And he's like, but I love you. How can I get you? And she's like, I don't know, do some fucking science shit. And he's like, I will go on an adventure for you, lady. And it's like, my goodness, that girl just wants to be your friend, man. Just be chill and stop being a weirdo. And this one kind of undercuts that because he finds another woman that he loves on, like, inside of the Lost World, which is cool, which kind of at least makes that a little bit more palatable than, like, the way that the way that movie works. That original book works. And, you know, this movie, it brings the good parts about the book as well, which is, like, Professor Challenger specifically. I enjoy Sir John Roxon. I think those are both kind of fun, adventure-y characters, and they're both presented super well in this movie and are super fun. So every good thing you get from the book, which isn't that much, it's well written, but, like, it's pretty trash, is presented here in a way that is even more historically important, because it is really what kind of starts the dinosaur craze. Because the stop motion dinosaurs in this would lead to King Kong, which would lead to Godzilla, which to me, that level of historical importance will always make that better than the book. There is a level of craftsmanship here. This is one of the first movies, and maybe the first movie, to ever feature a dinosaur being brought to the modern world and then, like, having, like, a fight and, like, trashing up a city. Like, this is the one that started that. That's not even in the book. There is no scene where they bring a brontosaurus. Yes, it exists again, as paleontology is complicated. But in the book, it's like, in the movie, it's a brontosaurus. They bring the brontosaurus back, and it, like, wrecks up London in a very fun sequence to end the movie. So I think this historical importance to this, as a history piece, I think it's more important. I think if you're doing a history on colonialism, you probably should assign that original Arthur Conan Doyle book for research, because it is just prime everything that was wrong with the 20th century mindset. And I don't care that it's from a different era. Save your whatever. So I think there's a lot more historical importance in this movie than there is in the book. Now, if you're not a historian, if you're not someone who wants to go back and figure out the origins of cinematic special effects, you don't have to. You can just skip the Lost World movie as well. You don't really need to get either of those. This is just for other people like me who are very much historical nerds. I do think that a lot of the dinosaur scenes in this are super fun. Last, but certainly not least, because this is the movie that I think I like proportionally way more than the book that it's based off of. And that is Deadly Eyes. This is the movie tie-in version. You will probably better know this as The Rats. Now, listen. I understand that, again, like The Lost World, The Rats is a historically important book. I prefer, like, The Lair, or which is the sequel to that, and I even like Dominion much better than the original Rats. There is a lot of gross writing going on by James Herbert in that original book. A lot of pretty gross racist thoughts, and just kind of like some good old-fashioned English superiority bullshit in the original Rats that just kind of makes it not as much fun. And for an animal attack books, you kind of just want some fun. It's really mean. That book is really mean spirited. There are good parts about it. There's some amazing just like set piece moments in the Rats, which are really really good and really cool. But as a whole, the movie is so much better. One, it's filmed in Toronto. Therefore, it's my Canadian darling. I've been to places that are shown in this movie that will always probably just kind of like put it up a little bit. Two, the killer rats in this movie are a bunch of dogs that they dressed up as rats. And you can see them all wagging their tail and having the best time, and they're like coming and like swarming people. And there's actually some really cool animatronics where like the rats have like these like amazing like giant like claws, like big old teeth, and go and it's amazing. It's so good. Deadly Eyes is so good. It's so cheesy. It's so 80s. Like it is cheese central. And it's very funny and it's very silly. And I love Deadly Eyes. It's so much fun. And I just think it's a lot better than the Rats. So here is my video. What books do you think are actually not as good as their movie counterparts? Let me know in the comments. Goodbye.